All right, so thank you guys once again. This webinar is sponsored by Navionics and our co-sponsor, Hook One Kayak or Hook One Outfitters. These guys have great selection of kayaks, wilderness systems, feel frees, many others. They got accessories, baits, and Craig. Excuse me.
Thanks for that. Appreciate that.
What's that? That one?
That's not that. That's my buddy Mike Ernst took that photo. He's incredible with the camera. So anyway,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it looks like you're pretty good with the fish there, old buddy.
Yes, yeah. Not too bad.
All right. So Craig Dye, let me run through the Craig Dye's qualifications to really teach us something about crankbait fishing. Other than the fact that he's just a really great guy, Craig is a two-time Tennessee state champion, three-time Tennessee team state champion, the KBF trail champion, the River Bassin trail champion, River Bassin trail team champion. He had an 8th place finish in the 2018 KBF national championship out of how many anglers was it, Craig?
I think it was 740, if I remember right.
8th out of 740. It's not too bad.
Yes,
Craig was selected for Team USA on the Pan American kayak tournament that's going to be on Center Hill Lake. When is that tournament supposed to?
I don't know the exact week, but it's going to be in May, and it's like you said, it's on Center Hill. That's one of my all-time favorite lakes. I've actually only fished it about 8 or 10 times, and I love it, man. Big spotted bass, big smallmouth, and big largemouth. Can't wait to get back out there.
I remember was several years ago on the cover of Bassmasters magazine. Guy was holding up a 9-pound smallmouth that he caught on Center Hill.
That's ridiculous. I don't even understand that. To be honest with you, that's too big. That's ridiculous.
Craig is also Wilderness Systems Pro Array Marine, Pro Staffer Torpedo, Bending Branches, Rapala, or how do you pronounce it, Rapala or Rapala?
Well,
Rapala. I've heard it three different ways.
When I lived in Louisiana, it was always Rapala, but now I don't know, for some reason I started calling it Rapala. I guess my buddy Mike's from up there and he calls it Rapala, so I don't know. I guess depends on where you're from or whatever. All I know is they're awesome. So yeah, that's all I'm worried about.
And of course, he is a Hook One pro staffer. He's the pro staff director. That's correct.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir. I've been doing it for about 3 years now, and we got a staff of about 30, and we just added another whitewater guy on the team, so we're right about 31 members right now, and going strong.
And some of the guys you have on that team, there's some pretty good sticks on that team with Hook One. Guy Greg Massa, he's a North Alabama kayak guy.
Yes, sir.
Really showed me quite a bit on kayak fishing. Been very helpful to me. Big Trey Johnson. I mean, that guy's to watch him pile into a kayak is comical. I think he's like 6'5".
Yeah, he's a big guy, but man, he's and he can fish, man. I wish I could get on the water more with him, but locally, Center Hill, those type lakes, he can catch them, man. He's really good, really good.
Kind of a funny story. The first time I ever met Trey, and it's the only time I fished with or against. However, we were doing a throwdown style tournament on Pickwick, and I hadn't been kayak fishing long, and one of the guys in North Alabama Kayak Anglers invited me over and fished with that group over there and had a good time. Actually ended up winning that tournament. I think I had 2 16.5-inch fish. It was tough.
Right. Yeah.
It was tough, but Trey's a serious stick. But you guys have some serious guys on that pro staff.
Yeah, I did my best to pick guys that are, really key tournament guys and also non-tournament guys. Greg Massa and a couple other are non-tournament guys, and they're really experts in what they love to do. And like for Greg, Greg, for example, is finding that backwater spring or, they're really hard to get to places and finding big bass. And he's really good at it. He puts in a lot of time. I think he fishes 3 or 4 days a week, maybe more. And so, I try to do my best of getting, a mix of tournament guys that love to hit the road, fish the KBF stuff and the other stuff. And then guys that just love to get out and just do it just because they like catching fish and figuring them out and, trying to, put the puzzle together.
Yeah. Greg's got he's got, and we'll get off of Greg here in just a minute, guys. But one of the funniest things I ever heard Greg. He asked me one day, what pound braid do I use when I frog fish? I said, typically just spool up a 50-pound. He asked me why I was using finesse line.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Some of the places where he goes to fish, you better be ready.
Oh, yeah.
What I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So.
All right. So, Craig, we're going to run down some of the stuff that you like to use, like what rods do you use, what type of line, reel ratios, and what are your go-to crankbaits? And I will let you address each one of these questions one at a time. So let's get started with what rod or rods do you use in crankbait fishing?
Well, I won't go into specific brands yet, but for throwing a crankbait, the number one thing you need to do is get a rod that has a soft tip or just a medium action rod, works real well. Also, there's a lot of medium heavies out there that do have a soft tip, a moderate tip that work well. And the reason I like this type of rod is because if you ever seen if you can see, can you see this on your screen, Jason? This fine? Where I'm holding the crankbait up right now?
I cannot.
Okay. I don't know if anybody can see or not. I know they can see the slideshow, but can they see me? That's the question.
All right, just 1 second. Let me. All right, let's see. Give me just 1 second, guys. All right, and
okay.
Go ahead and throw up. There you are. All right, so now I can see you. All right.
Okay.
So go ahead.
All right. So I wanted to be up on here for this reason. So if you ever, been at Bass Pro and watched a bass eat a shiner or a minnow or whatever, or a shad, when they eat it, they the bait gets sucked in, right? You ever see that? They open their mouth, right? And the bait gets sucked in. So what I like to do is when you have a medium action rod, that allows for that bait, when that bass comes up to bite at it, it gets almost like a shock absorber. So when that bass opens his mouth, that bait just kind of gets sucked right into his mouth. And if you're using a medium heavy, that's a real stiff rod, or a heavy rod, the bait is not going to want to, it's not going to have that give. You know what I mean? So always try to go with a medium action or a medium heavy that has a soft tip on it. That's the main thing. Also, the other reason you want that type action rod is because especially these type of square bills and the like Rapala DT6 is you want to be knocking off rock and wood with this crankbait. You can get bites just cranking it in open water, but the number one thing is to get that reaction bite. And that's when that bait comes down, hits that log, and just kind of, goes sideways and rolls and just keeps on going. So make sure you have a medium rod. It allows for that bait to not get hung up and get stuck in those rocks and get stuck in those trees. And yes, it's going to happen. Yes, you're going to lose baits, but you know what? That's part of crankbait fishing, but it's worth it. It gets those bites that, some other baits won't get. So highly recommend a medium action rod. And I don't see the slideshow in front of me. What was the next one on there?
Let's see. It was. Hang on just 1 second. All right. What type of line do you like to use when you're crankbait fishing?
Okay, I'll go back 1 second, and I will talk about the brand I use of rods. Right now, I made a switch this year to St. Croix rods, and right now my number one go-to rod is the St. Croix Legend Glass. And this is a more expensive, high-end rod, but it has a great bend all the way down from the reel all the way to the tip, and it helps with keeping the bait stuck in the fish's mouth and also bouncing off any cover. So right now, my choice right now is the St. Croix Legend Glass cranking rod, and they are, man, they're nice. But to get to your question, fishing line, you get a lot of guys are switching to fluorocarbon right now. I mean, a lot. I mean, really, really not just now, but past few years. And for crankbait fishing, I'm a big fan of using just monofilament. I run through a lot of it. It's inexpensive and it works just fine. As long as you have a good quality rod, I like to use 10-pound line with most of my DT6, DT10 crankbaits. When it comes to square bills, I'm usually 10-pound, 12-pound, maybe 14-pound line. But most of the time, I'm using good old Stren or just that $8 to $10 spool of monofilament, and let me tell you, it works. It works just fine. I'm not losing any fish, and fluorocarbon is expensive, so I don't use a lot of fluorocarbon. Everybody has their kind of thing they like to do, but I definitely stick with mono when it comes to throwing crankbaits.
Now, using mono with crankbaits, and I was taught old school, the Rick Clunn school of thought, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Monofilament has more stretch, so you are
Mm-hmm.
how much? I mean, you're getting more depth with your crankbaits with that mono than what you would with a braid or a fluorocarbon or copolymer lines. Would you agree with that?
Well, not exactly. You hear a lot that fluorocarbon sinks and mono floats. So I would say you could probably get a little deeper with fluorocarbon line, but I can just get a crankbait and maybe go if I'm using a DT10, where I can go down to like a DT14, or if I'm in 8 foot of water, that DT6 getting it, I'll jump up to a DT10 and make sure I'm getting down to that bottom, and hitting on that rock and wood or brush or whatever I'm trying to, get that bait to knock off of. Like I said, I've used mono for years. I've tried fluorocarbon a little bit. I just like mono because it casts better, and I'm not having any problems with getting my bait where it needs to go. You still there, Jason?
Yeah, excuse me. I had went into a coughing fit, guys. I apologize. Reel ratios. So, what is your preferred reel
Mhm.
ratios?
Well, most guys, especially, bass boat guys, like a real slow reel for throwing crankbaits. And, the theory is it's just that type of gear ratio is less work on your body. It's kind of like the speed in, on a bicycle, like when you're trying to go up a hill, like, or you put it in like a low gear, and it uses those gears to it's easier to get that bait down, and it's less on your wrist and your arms and your back, with that slower gear ratio. But for me, I don't like to be real slow. Like a lot of guys use like 5.1 to 1 or whatever. But I feel in a crankbait, a lot of times when you hook that fish is coming to you. And a lot of times the kayak, because of the weight of the fish, you're going to the fish in the kayak. So those two things are coming together. And if that fish is coming at you and you have a slow ratio reel, I mean, it's really hard. You're reeling as fast as you can, and that fish is coming at you. And I've lost, a few fish doing that. So I'm actually running a 6.8 to 1 gear ratio. I think it's a great mix of, enough speed to catch up with the fish if you're going to him with the momentum of a kayak, or he's flying underneath the kayak or just coming right at you. I feel like I lose less fish. I don't love a high speed reel for throwing crankbaits. Maybe a square bill sometimes, but I feel like it's hard for me to really understand what that bait's doing because I just feel like it's grinding too hard and I'm losing the action, that I want from the crankbait. So I like that middle ground. 6.8 to 1 to me is just a perfect ratio for throwing crankbaits and pretty much any depth, from, 1 foot up to probably 15, 17 feet.
So, I don't think we really discussed this, but what reel, as far as what type of reel, manufacturer, brand, that kind of thing. What do you normally use?
Right now, I went over to Lose the last couple of years, And I've tried a lot of good brands. There's a lot of good brands out there, but I will say this: if you're serious about fishing and you fish a lot, and you especially with baits that you're winding a lot, it's a lot of wear and tear on a reel. So I'm a big fan of spending more money and getting less reels, if that makes sense. Instead of buying 12 reels and having a reel, a reel for every lure on your kayak, get 4 or 5 quality bait casters and maybe 1 or 2 really good spinning reels and spend more money. Spend $150, maybe up to $200. It'll make casting better. It'll just make your life a lot easier with backlashes, and the components are better, and and plus it'll last a lot longer. So right now, I'm using this. This is a speed spool. It's the Team Loose speed spool, and this is a 6/8 here. And this is perfect for shallow cranking, probably 10 foot or less. The spool is not very wide here. So for throwing deeper, for throwing, 10 foot to 10 foot, 20 foot plus, I like this is the BB1, Lose BB1. See how wide the spool is here? And I like that wide spool, that when you throw a big heavy crankbait, 50, 60 yards, you're going to lose a lot of line off that reel. And so, what it's going to do, it's really going to slow down your gear ratio if you lose all that line on that really, really far cast. So that's why I like to use a wider spool when I'm fishing really deep and casting really far, for that probably 12 to 20 or 20 foot plus cranking. I like that Lose, that BB1, man, that bait will fly. So that's been my choice probably for the last 3 years or so.
All right, I learned something there. I never took into consideration
Yeah.
the width of the spool
Yeah.
when you're deep cranking.
Well, think about on a regular spool, and you cast 60 yards with like a 5XD with a wind behind you. Half of your line is gone off your spool, right?
Yeah.
So the speed you're reeling that bait in slows down a lot. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
All right. So
Yep.
next question: what are your go-to crankbaits?
Well, well, everybody gives me a hard time about that DT6, but I'll tell you, I fell in love with it when I was in Tennessee fishing Percy Priest Lake. And Percy Priest Lake is rock and rock and more rock and some more rock and then more rock around the corner. And uh, it's a pretty clear lake. So the problem is you go out there with a square bill or spinner bait, and you can definitely catch them that way. Definitely catch them that way when it's right. But that water's pretty clear. It's usually 3 to 4 or 5 foot. And that DT6 gets it right in that magic zone there on that lake. And that's where I fell in love with it. Like summertime, springtime, you find a windy bank with rock on Percy Priest Lake, really Old Hickory Lake too, around Nashville. You're going to catch them on a Rapala DT6. It's just something about that perfect depth that a lot of guys miss. Like a lot of guys will go up and throw a spinnerbait or a chatterbait in 3, 4, 5 foot of water, right? And they don't catch a bite. Or, they'll fish an area and catch a few, and they'll move on. And that I feel like that 6 to 8 foot, it gets missed a lot. And I've talked about this in a video, actually a couple weeks ago. But I just feel like it's a depth that gets missed. A lot of guys will fish shallow in the morning. The sun will come up. Then they'll go offshore, or they'll just go through a worm or go do something different. But that's 6, 8, 10 foot. Especially when you're fishing deeper lakes, it's just a depth that you can go behind people and catch fish. Like right behind them, and not even think about, man, I'm fishing behind a guy. This is kind of a bummer. You can just go right behind them and just start whacking them. And they turn around and go, man, what was that about? What's he doing that I'm not doing? But yeah, I love the classic, man. It's just a great bait. I love it.
All right. So your preferred colors?
Man, here's one right here. The Helsinki shad. It's just a confidence thing for me. It's just white on the bottom, little chartreuse, and it's kind of blue, a little bit of gray on the top. But that's just a confidence thing for me. And then I also like these BX Brats that Rapala came out with last year. And this is one of my favorite colors. I forget the name of it, but this is the 6 foot one here. I think it's called something crawl. But yeah, that's a pretty cool one. This is what I won $7,000 with last year at the national championship on Kentucky Lake. This is actually yeah, exactly like that one.
So
So
the BX Brat, that's a balsa core bait. Is that right? With
yeah, it's
plastic on.
balsa, and then it has plastic on the exterior, and I like it. I like it. It's a good, good. That's the KVD 1.5, and that's the that right there is the BX Brass. Just a little bit smaller, a little more finesse. If the water's a little clear, I might throw it. If the wind's blowing, I'll probably pick up the old 1.5 and throw that one, or a spinnerbait or a chatterbait. But yeah, that BX Brass, that everybody knows that bite last year for the national championship was really tough. Kentucky leg, it was really hard to catch him. Dwayne Taft was on Barkley with me, probably about a mile away, and obviously we know how he did. Got a serious $100,000 paycheck. And I was right down the river from him, or right upriver, and just bouncing off every piece of rock and wood that I can find. And then on day two, um, I was looking at the weather when I woke up, and that wind was blowing right onto that bank. And I looked at my buddy Callaway, and I said, "Look, I'm going to catch him today," because that wind started blowing. It wasn't a whole lot of wind, but it was just enough to get those fish up shallow and fired up to eat, man. So it was a very cool day for me, man, and hopefully it'll happen again next week. I guess we'll see.
All
So,
right. Yeah. What's your not to give away too much as far as your game plan, but
mhm.
what are you looking at as far as have you been able to get down there and practice for the national championship or anything like that?
No, I have not. I fished waters very similar to that. I grew up, in South Louisiana, but I've never fished these actual lakes. For me, I'm going to have 3.5 days to pre-fish. I'm going to cover a lot of water and probably hit 3 different lakes over those 3.5 days. And my plan is, from what I know, when you find one, there's more. So I'm going to try to find as many fish as I can in an area, leave it alone, mark it, leave it alone, mark it, leave it alone, and have 5 or 6 of those spots that I can go to, throughout the day, and you know, just be real thorough in the areas where I know there are fish. That's kind of my plan for next week, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this full moon and a lot of 70-degree weather between now and then. So some big fish are going to be caught.
Right on. All right. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow, guys.
Yeah.
All right. So right now you should be seeing a slide. Let's talk about the seasonal breakdown and how you do things, crankbait wise, pre-spawn, post-spawn. What kind of summer pattern do you normally like to fish? Your fall patterns, and
Yeah.
dive into the winter pattern as well. So I'll let you pick and choose how you want to go through each one of these seasonal breakdowns.
Okay. Well, I'll just start at the top. Well, let's just start at the winter pattern. Winter pattern for me when it comes to crankbaits is, I've caught fish with crankbaits and water that's been probably, mid 40s. So I feel like in Tennessee and Georgia, Kentucky, you can pretty much throw it year round. And I mean, I always have crankbaits tied on, but I usually go crankbait fish, go throw crankbaits until the fish tell me, nah, not today, and then I'll break out a drop shot or a shaky head, or, even the A rig. I hate it, but the A rig just catches them. But it's just, I don't love throwing that thing.
I love a
Um,
rig, man. What's wrong with
Man, that thing.
God?
I mean, I feel like I look silly out there throwing that bowling ball around. It's just crazy. But hey, a lot of guys have taken my money throwing it, and I need to throw it more. But anyway, I'll run through these quick. For me in the winter, just like every other time of year, it's all about finding bait. But in the winter, like in the summer, I'm looking for windy banks, shade, stuff like that, a lot of cover. In the winter, I kind of go for the opposite. I look for the banks that the sun is on them the longest, and I look for bait, and I look for calm coves, stuff like that. And obviously, you got to have deep water close in the winter. So when I'm cranking, I like, I love parallel on the bank, so that 8, 10, 12 foot, throwing shad wraps, throwing DT10s, DT6s, a little bit slower, especially when the water's, in the upper 40s, lower 50s. I mean, sometimes you really got to crawl it along those rocks. Now pre-spawn, this is where, that mid 50s, upper 50s, the fish get a little more active, and they really start eating that bait even when it's cold outside. We had our season opener last year for kayak bass fishing TN, and it was snowing, and I was hammering them on a square bill crankbait. They were just firing it, man. Everybody was cold and it was snowing, but everybody thought the fish are going to be lethargic. The water temperature didn't change much. They were up there and they were chomping, and I was throwing. Actually, this, I don't even know if you can still see me right now, but that's the KVD 1.5 chartreuse blackback, and I won that tournament. And then, so pre-spawn, I'm covering water more. I'm hitting a lot of those secondary points. I'm getting back shallower. A lot of that 5, 10, 15. Back in the pockets in the coves, and also a few main lake points, kind of depending on what's going on with the water, what the water temp and all that. But and then post spawn, I'm all out fishing a lot of KVD 1.5s, a lot of the BX Brack, covering water, rocking wood, and obviously looking for those spawning flats that 2 to 5 foot where you got a lot of stuff to throw at, and just covering water. And then summer pattern, shallow cranking early in the morning. Once again, DT6, KVD 1.5, depending on what depth you're doing, and obviously a lot of shade, looking for a lot of shade, looking for bait, looking for birds on the bank. I tell you what, seeing those birds on the bank, that works. You see it on like Bassmaster, you see it on Major League Fishing, you see it. Oh man, I'm gonna catch one here. If you're around bait, no matter what season, you're around fish. You just got to figure them out.
Yeah. That's
you know what I mean?
A lot of people have a hard time with that, including me.
Well, now there is a such thing as too much bait.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be really tough when you're fishing an area. I've seen it on Percy Priest where you're in 30 foot of water and you're paddling, and your depth finder all of a sudden says it's 5 foot, and you're still in 30 foot of water, but if you can see those, those fish going through those bait balls, you can catch a lot of times with a rattle trap, a swim bait, or even running a DT6 or DT10 right through those bait balls with without knocking off any cover. That works pretty, that also works well. I will say this, a key to that is you need quality electronics, especially when you're fishing offshore. And I mean, if you're taking it serious, you're fishing a lot of tournaments, put the money in, and get you a good Lowrance or Raymarine ute. I'm using the new Raymarine Element right now, and I'm loving it. The clarity is it's unbelievable. So
I actually got a couple of snapshots from the Element in the slideshow, and
yeah.
I'll be showing. I'm going to get Craig to break down what we're seeing on some of that stuff, but have we moved past summer pattern, fall pattern, winter pattern? So we're good, right?
Yeah, well, just the fall pattern. Obviously, the shad. What happens is, we get those colder nights. The shads start moving to the back of the pockets.
Yeah.
The fish follow, and that a lot of times in the fall, when you find them, you usually find a lot of them, just like the winter time.
Oh yeah.
So that's probably one of the most fun times to throw a crankbait because they're aggressive, and I mean they're chasing shad. Anything that looks, I mean these DTs look, I mean they usually match the shad perfectly, and you can just go to town. So yeah, that pretty much breaks it down. A quick breakdown of the seasons, hopefully.
Oh yeah, good quick breakdown. All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some offshore structure. There should be a screenshot up of Guntersville Lake, and I believe this is South Saudi on Guntersville, and there's a few humps out here. We're looking in 6 foot down through there. So breaking it down, how would you approach this offshore hump or this series of offshore humps?
Okay. The first thing I would do is I would motor. You can see those two humps right in the middle that come up to about 6 feet. And I imagine, depending on what time of the year, that's going to be full of grass if I had to guess. But let's just say there's not grass there. First thing I would do is I would use my Torpedo motor, and I would just motor over everything and just find, look for bait. Obviously, look for any type of rock piles, look for any brush piles, and just motor over the whole thing and just mark spot. and then I would just kind of say, okay, the wind's blowing this way. There's a guy in a bass boat over here, but you got this going on. And then I would figure out what angle I want to fish it. Um, I'm a big believer of fishing with the wind or with the current. So I know when a kayak, it's a pain to, it depends on what you're using. If you have a motor or a pedal drive kayak, I mean, it's a little bit easier, but I'm a big fan of even on a hump, even though it's a little bit deeper, of throwing, upwind into the wind and cranking down as fast as you can and get to the bottom as fast as you can and move your bait with the current. I feel like the fish are going to set up. Let's just say here the wind's blowing from the west, to the east over that. Yeah, over right there, blowing. Say left to right on my screen. I would be on the right side throwing like probably a DT10, and right on the top of that. If I'm marking fish and bait there, if it looks like something I need to do. But yeah, you can see that steep drop right there. I feel like those fish are going to be behind that setup, just like you would on a river, just like you would, just like in an eddy sometimes. They would sit right there. And that's the first place I would try. Not saying it works every time, but that's the first thing that I would do is have my boat in that 13 to 15 foot depth, casting way past the hump. So all the way, yeah. And then so you can get the bait down quickly, and I would be dragging all that right there. And I would do it over, maybe 5, 10, 8 casts, something like that. If it's not feeling right, I might even go out and go a little more north and maybe throw a DT10 and try to see if they're a little bit deeper. But I would always be throwing into the wind, reeling my bait with the wind, with the current. That's probably the most important thing that I do. It's helped me do real well in tournaments in the past. And yeah, so that's the first thing that I would do when I look at it. That's the first thing I see. And that's the first thing that I would do.
All right, so you prefer to approach current deep side first. They
Yes.
That way they dip off into that deeper water. They feel more
Mm-hmm.
protected. Come back up onto the hump to feed. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
and sometimes it works, and sometimes you have to do it the opposite direction with the wind behind your back. But that's really tough to do in any kayak, especially even if you have a motor or a pedal system. Pedaling backwards with a rudder in the wind is not as easy as it sounds. But it sounds, oh man, I'm just going to back up and stay in place. It's not easy. I've had a pedal kayak in the past, and it's much easier casting into the wind and bringing your bait with it for sure, especially when you're trying to stay in a certain area and fish, like, to be specific as, right on top of that hump right there.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, it's one of the considerations you have to make whenever you're taking your kayak out onto the bigger water. What's the wind going to do? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
structure am I planning on fishing? What's my technique today? So yeah, I mean, backpedaling
Right.
just about impossible in that situation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, if you go back, there's a lot of ways to fish that, but honestly, for me, most of the time, when you're offshore, you got to deal with the wind. Most of the time, the way that I fish it, a lot of, especially because you're in a kayak, I mean, you can only do so much. It's really based on what the wind is doing. So, don't, you see something like that, you want to fish exactly perfect one way and the wind's just not letting you. Sometimes it's not worth fighting it. Sometimes it's okay to fish it, let's say you call it fishing backwards or fishing uphill instead of downhill or, whatever. But usually the wind determines how I'm going to fish area like that.
Okay. All right. So this is a point
Mm-hmm.
off of I believe this is Chickamauga. Uh,
Okay. Yep.
how would you approach this point, working your way around it?
Well, for throwing a crankbait, it's almost identical to what you showed me in the last one. What I would do, depending on what the wind is doing, but if I would probably be on the, let's say on the, if you look at the screen, on the right side or the east side of it, and probably have a DT14, and I would be casting as far as I can out, toward that deep water. And I would sit there and probably do 20 casts. I would start shallow, work my way deep, and then I would actually, if you don't get any bites doing that, I would actually run out and then cast actually right on the point, directly at it. Sometimes that angle works. Just depends a lot of times on the current, depends on the wind, depends on who else is around you, and it depends on a lot of things. But the number one thing, and probably, I mean, the golden rule for me is I want to be having contact with the bottom.
Right.
That bait, it looks amazing just running through the water, but a lot of those bites you get are when they're, bouncing off the rock, bouncing off the wood. And then when it deflects, man, it just looks so good in the water. And that's how you can catch a lot of fish behind people. A lot of guys are going to throw crankbaits and, but to do it right and have that bait bouncing. I have one here, and I think guys can see me. I have a small screen, but look at the bill of that thing. I mean, it's beat up real bad. And that's what I want all my crankbaits to look like, because that's what triggers those bites and makes those fish, a lot of times I don't want to throw anything else. Either those fish are going to have to get out of the way or they're going to have to bite it. Does that make sense? Like I get pretty intense about it, and I stick to my guns with it. But it will catch fish when other guys are struggling, even when it's super calm, slick conditions. Bouncing a KVD 1.5 and getting that reaction strike, it works.
Throw that. Go ahead and show that crankbait one more time.
Yeah, you see how beat up it is.
Yeah.
That thing, it's hit some rock for sure.
Yeah, that's looks like a go-to. Yeah. And you were showing us something earlier that the KVD 1.5.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah.
That's a moneymaker right there. Really, it is.
It is. Well, I believe you, man.
And I'll give one quick tip for throwing square bill crankbaits. I don't always believe it's the color of the crankbait. I don't always think it's the brand or the look or I know guys get crazy with custom painted crankbaits, and man, they do look beautiful, but I definitely think they're more for catching the fishermen, in my opinion. I like different shades. Like I don't know if I can show. I'll be real quick. See, you can see that one real quick. I had those made for Louisiana, those Rapala DT6s. But for me, throwing, especially square bill crankbaits, it's all about really good casting and putting that bait where a lot of guys aren't putting it. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you have a couple logs laying down, the guy's going to go up and throw a crankbait or spinnerbait, at the ends of it or whatnot. But there's a little magic sweet spot of getting that bait right on the bank, right against that wood, and bringing it down and have the fish, like he just gets surprised and caught off guard, and they just eat it. They're not even in a feeding mode really. They're just sitting underneath in that shade, and all of a sudden that thing just comes flying by them. They just react to it. So accurate casting is very important when it comes to throwing, square bill crankbait, because you want to get it in those little sweet spots. And I wish I had a picture of something that I could show you, but a lot of times that'll get a lot of bites, when you're fishing behind people.
All right, so we've talked about humps and we've talked about points. So this is Center Hill Lake, where you're going to be in May, and I think this is about as extreme a bluff wall as I find, man. I mean, this thing.
That says 150.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The contour lines. These are 1 foot contour lines. Give everybody a quick rundown. All of these lines, that is a 1 foot depth change. And looking next to this dock, it looks like someone has just taken a Sharpie and just one solid black line there. So
ridiculous.
That's about an extreme of a bluff wall as I'm going to find. So maybe it's a little challenging for you. How would you break that down?
Well, a lot of times the big smallmouth and even largemouth too, that they'll roam those bluff walls a lot of times in the colder months. A lot of guys catch them on A-rigs and jerk baits and a lot of other things. But you can definitely go, and the key to that is find those little ledges off those bluffs that you really got to get a depth finder and pretty much put your kayak against the wall is really the best way to do it. Get right against the wall, and you can parallel a DT6, a DT10, and those fish that are suspended up there on those little ledges that stick out, and you can definitely catch fish doing that. A lot of times they'll want to pin that bait against the wall, and that does work pretty well. I think going up and straight up casting, right at a wall like that, I think it'd be hard, to get a consistent bite, but you could parallel that, with maybe a shad wrap in the winter or probably the summer too, and get a few bites here and there. Personally, I'd probably be staying away from 154 feet, but but yeah, parallel in the bank would be key. Would be key in there doing something like that.
Well, if you look to the north, looking at this little cut right here, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you see these drastic 1 foot contour lines all along this bluff,
Yeah.
and for me, if I were studying this at home,
Mm-hmm.
going to fish this lake, and there's, I just like throwing a crankbait at bluff walls or stuff like that.
Right.
I would be looking at this area right here to the north, where that indent
Yeah.
of the bank is, and
Yeah.
you see some gradual changes in those 1 foot contours right there. But for me, I would key on something like that. Do you typically like to key and work these areas a little bit harder as you're transitioning? Oh, pardon me, guys. As you're transitioning from like this extreme to the next extreme, and work
Um,
these changes in the structure.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you have a bank that's super, super straight and something changes, that's always a spot, and I think it was Gerald Swindle said something about, always fish the obvious. You're fishing down a bluff bank and it's dead straight. And all of a sudden, it comes in and let's just say it's 8 foot on the bottom and there instead of 50 feet. And especially if there's current. If there's current right there
Mm-hmm.
and that's creating a little eddy, I promise you, I'll be going right to that spot, throwing a crankbait a little bit. If you don't get a bite, maybe throwing a shaky head in there and just kind of let it come down that steep bank. You never know. So yeah, absolutely. Always fish the obvious for sure.
Yeah. All right. So real quick, I want to give everybody an opportunity to go through some questions, but we got a couple more topics
Sure.
to go through quickly. Breaking down shallow water. Beat it off the wood and off the rocks, right?
Yeah. The key for me, especially in the next month or so, is I like to find banks that have a little depth right by the bank. And for especially for somewhere like Old Hickory Lake, there's a lot of places that look good that have a lot of rock and wood, but when you're a cast off the bank, you're sitting in 3 foot of water. Those banks where you're sitting in 6 or 8 foot of water and it's 3 or 4 foot right by the bank, those are usually really, really good spots, especially the next 2 months.
Yeah.
And you can work it with a square bill. You can even, let's say you work it with a square bill, you get nothing. You can always bring your kayak out a full cast where your bait is landing where your kayak has been when you were running the bank,
Mm-hmm.
and then take out a DT6 or DT10, and those fish that are looking to go spawn and move up, they're going to be on a rock or a log or something to get ready to move up shallow.
Right.
That's a good way to catch them. When the water's in the upper 50s, maybe even the lower 60s, just kind of depending on kind of what their mood is.
Right. All right. Let's talk a little bit about electronics. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about electronics. This
Mm-hmm.
is a screen from the Element, the Raymarine Element Hypervision.
Yeah.
This is the down vision shot. Um,
Mm-hmm.
just talk a little bit about what you're seeing here and how you would approach this if you saw this on your depth finder.
Well, the first thing I noticed, what probably everybody does, is you can see that bait right in the middle, and yeah, that's a bait ball right there. I'm not exactly what they're sitting on. I mean, obviously it's
Looks
some
like a
type of
mailbox.
hard. Let's say it does look like a mailbox. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It does. Looks like some type of wood or logs or some. Looks like maybe a couple stumps right there.
Yeah.
So for me, if I was going over that, I would want my kayak to be to the left, which would be behind me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of times when I see something like that, I'll actually stop and back up immediately, and then you'll go over it again backwards with your transducer, and you'll see it again,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll throw my bait way out, and I'll let my bail. So let's just say I'm backing up, right? I'm backing up either with a motor or pedals, or I'm paddling. I'll cast a long cast to the, in theory, I would be to the right of this picture with my bait,
Right.
and then I would have my spool open, and I would reel backwards with my spool open, and then I would start reeling that crankbait, and it would come down and hit the top of that little flat, and then it would go right where that bait is, and it would pop off that lip right there. And I would expect to get a bite right there where your cursor is.
Yeah.
I don't see any necessarily bass in there, but I do see some bait. I do see some hard cover structure in there, and I mean that's a high percentage point. I mean you got to go for it.
Right.
So
All right. All right. Breaking down this next one. Tell us what you're seeing here and how you would approach it.
I kind of the same thing we just did, but kind of more of a left to right, which is it still would be, backing up to it. So, obviously you see some brush piles right there, maybe a couple fish mixed in on the left-hand side. And then you see that brush right there on that drop. That looks key to me. That's something I would definitely hit a crankbait off of. And the key is hitting the crankbait off of it and getting that reaction bite. A lot of times, a guy would see that, throw a worm in there and definitely get bites, but having that crankbait bounce off of there, it'll get that extra bite.
Oh yeah, the the clarity on this. I mean, you can really tell.
I know it's ridiculous.
It's pretty sick.
Yeah, it's
all
ridiculous.
Right. All right, so I'm going to open this up to questions. We've got a little bit of time. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them up. Hit the chat or hit those questions, and we'll let Craig answer them for you.
I see where James asked, do I turn my kayak around or do I just back up? I actually do both depending on how far I'm away from what I'm fishing. If I'm moving quickly, obviously I'm just going to turn around and make my way back to that spot, and fish it. But if I'm moving slowly, like if I'm fishing and I see something pop up, I'll just back paddle a few times and then try to hit that spot right underneath the kayak.
All right, awesome. Let's see. Does anyone else have any more questions?
It's hard for me to read. What did Jimmy say right there? I'm trying to see it better. It says the best colors for clear cranking this time of year and what depths to target. He must have asked that earlier. For clear water this time of year, I'm not crazy about colors, especially when it comes to detail, but I am about shades. If the water's clear, I'm definitely throwing a shad, anything white, any type of shad color. This time of year, red is always a good color. As if you watch the Bassmaster Classic, a lot of guys were throwing red. Even in clear water, red is always good. They're eating on crawfish, or it's just something about red in the spring. I can't always explain it, but always have one available if they're not hitting that, like a red shad color. And if the water is muddy or stained, I'm definitely going with a chartreuse or some type of orange chartreuse, green color, bright green color.
All right. Chris Marks asks, when hitting riprap, how long do you keep cranking? Heard that if no reaction within a few pulls right off the edge, reel up and throw again. Any truth in that methodology?
Well, it depends on how much, if you got, a quarter mile of riprap or just riprap, underneath a bridge. I've caught a lot of fish cranking riprap. That's probably one of the most consistent ways to catch them, with a crankbait. And especially, I'll give this tip. If the wind's blowing against riprap and the water's, say, in the 60s, they're going to be biting it. There's going to be fish there. There's usually going to be bait around, especially if it's around a bridge. I'm not sure about, what was this question about how many times you cast at it? Was that the question?
Yeah, he was wondering if no reaction within a few pulls right off edge, reel up, throw again. Any truth in that methodology? How long? He wants to know how long you would keep cranking that.
Well, the same spot, not long at all. I usually keep moving. I'll work, both of the bends, underneath the bridge. And if I'm not getting bites quickly, I'll usually move on. But if I'm marking a lot of bait and I'm seeing some fish kind of feeding on bait on my depth finder, I might try to go maybe a little deeper or a little shallower, and give it another 10 or 15 minutes. But I won't spend too much time. They usually, if they're biting on riprap, they usually let you know pretty quickly.
All right. Sam Dean wants to know round bend or wide gap hooks?
I've gone to the KVD. This is the Mustad, the triple grips. And I guess it's just a confidence thing. But for me, I like to either go up one size. See, I'll show you. So this is the Mustad triple grips, and this is the stock size. You can see the difference. See the size difference? I feel like it helps me get more fish in the kayak. So, I mean, and a lot of the stock hooks are great, but I'm a big fan of the Mustad triple grips. They're a little more expensive, and it's a pain changing them. But when it comes to winning $50,000, and you want to get that bass in the kayak, and you got one hook, you want to have some confidence that that fish is going to stay on, and you can get him on the board.
All right. Let's see. Ryan Crum wants to know what you think the best budget fish finder is for clarity. I would say a Ray Marine Dragonfly for a kayak is a good budget unit. Humminbird Helix, Helix 5, something like that. That's a decent unit too. But for me, it would be a Ray Marine Dragonfly. That is a good budget fish finder.
I agree 100%. I had the Ray Marine Dragonfly 7, but the 5 is just as good. The number one thing I like about that unit is the down vision and how crisp it is. The reason I went to that exact depth finder is I was paddling next to someone, and I could see, like, we were in an area where there's a lot of grass, and I could see the stalks of grass crystal clear, and I could see what was in the grass. And I said, that's what I want. But the key to down vision is you need to be moving. I'm not sure the perfect speed, but 2-3 miles an hour with that down vision gives you the perfect clarity.
Yeah.
And then when I'm not moving, I have the regular sonar on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Ray Marine Dragonfly 5, I mean, I don't think you can get better for the price.
No,
in my opinion.
I agree with you 100% on that. Productive color for clear water.
Yeah, I answered that one a minute ago.
Okay.
Just any shad color. I'm not real crazy about, like I said, detail and color. To me, it's about shades. Clear water, I throw shad. Stained water, I like chartreuse with black back. Obviously throw some red in the spring, and then I keep it pretty simple. I mean, I really do. And I have, if it's muddy, this DT6 here, that's the Fire Tiger color, I believe. That works real well. If you only got 1 or 2 foot visibility, that's a killer color.
Bip Burridge.
Yeah, I know him. He's from Nashville. I know him well. Yeah.
He says, "Show that Caddo special again." I don't know what that means, but
well, I had a couple. I'll show you real quick. There you go. That's all you get. That's all you get. No, that's my buddy Robert Weicker with Line Out Custom Tackle. Every year for this tournament, he makes a few special colors. It's nothing crazy detailed, just some shades that I like. And I grew up in Louisiana. We had certain things that we threw when we were little, and I'm kind of trying to bring a little bit of that up over to Shreveport for some good luck.
All right. We're just about out of time, guys.
Yeah.
So all the questions that you guys still have, and there's still several, I apologize for not being able to get to all of them. Email them. You can email them to me, and I will get them forwarded to Craig, or I'm sure if you hit him up on Facebook or Instagram, and he'll be happy to answer any of these questions. If you have any questions for me, you can email them to me or hit me up on Facebook. My email is jlack@navionics.com. I got to throw up one more slide real quick, guys. Just showing a little bit more love for our co-sponsor for tonight, Hook One Outfitters. Couple stores there. Hit them up, kayakfishinggear.com. Go see their Hendersonville store, their Murfreesboro store. Go see Chris Condor and his beard. His beard has caught more fish than most fishermen. I honestly believe that.
It is fantastic. It
is a fantastic beard. Craig, I want to say thank you so much for sharing some knowledge with us. And
yes, sir.
To everyone that attended, Thank you guys. I greatly appreciate it. And I think that's about all I've got. If you're done, I'm done, man. You got anything you want to add?
I just want to say thanks for having me on here, and get out there and throw that crankbait, knock it off some rocking wood, chase the windy bank in the warm months, chase the calm banks in the the winter months, and you're gonna catch them. So thanks for watching.